I'm the CEO and co-founder of Deal Ignite. I've got Ed Fowler with me here today,
Hi, Frank.
and we're going to talk about AI.
We are indeed.
Welcome, Ed.
Thank you very much, Tim. How are you? You all right?
I'm very good. Yeah, I've not seen you for a couple of weeks. I had a week's holiday or vacation, as they call it in the US.
Yeah, excellent. Very nice indeed. So we've got AI today. We've got two topics. We've got one talking about AI model collapse, and the second one talking about 3D printing. Which would you like to start with?
Let's go with the AI model collapse. For me, these are just two fascinating subjects. And for people, if you're watching on my LinkedIn profile, if you go and you're seeing this underneath, the links to all of the articles that Ed and I are going to be talking about are there.
Awesome.
So if you want to have a look at them and review them yourself, you can do that.
Awesome. So the thing about AI model collapse is quite interesting. So I'm going to use a bit of an analogy to explain what it is. You get a piece of paper. It's got text on it. You stick it in the photocopier. Photocopy it. You take the copy out, throw the original away, put the copy back in. Keep doing it. What happens is the model or the picture degrades. It starts getting fuzzy, the quality bleeds out, etc. And what also happens is bright spots start appearing elsewhere on the image that weren't there in the original one, as dirt in the machine picks up.
Yeah.
AI model collapse is essentially that with generative AI. And it's driven by the fact is, as we progress through the future, more and more of the text or images or music online will be created by AIs.
Right.
Currently, the current generation of AIs aren't really AIs. They are narrative engines, stochastic parrots, etc. So they take a statistical analysis of a very large block of text or music or images. And therefore, when you give them a prompt, they predict something of that. So if everything's human generated in their library, the statistical model's pretty good. If more and more of this stuff is generated by bots or other AIs, instead of it being a beautiful sort of bell curve statistical model, what happens is the bell curve starts narrowing in, effectively like on the photocopier, where the image bled in. What starts to happen, instead of you just getting one beautiful bell curve, you get quite a narrow peak, which means that outside things, it almost goes random. It only recognizes very small areas. But what you also get is essentially secondary or tertiary peaks elsewhere in this bell curve, which means it starts randomly turning stuff. There was a very in-depth piece of research done, and I think the links to that research has been published up.
So one of the things you sent me was quite a long white paper.
Yeah, and that research details this in sort of every sort of aspect of it.
It goes in when it got to the mathematical formulas. It was a bit above me, really.
I think you just skip most of those and go, yeah, I understand that vaguely. All right, that's too complicated. But the actual primary point being is that if you were, say, a Gen 1 AI that's trained on human-generated text, and you asked it about the capital of Dakota, for example, it would talk to you quite naturally about the capital of Dakota. It might tell you about the town. It might tell you about the building, etc. If you keep iterating with this text generated by other AIs in it, what happens is, in the example they used, it started talking about rabbits. And then because it started talking about rabbits the first time, every time you asked about it, the conversation just went off into strange, narrow areas, unless you were hyper-specific. And then as it progressed on, it couldn't even break into that. It kind of forgotten what you were talking about. Now, that means that the AI model has a massive risk at the core of it. If you continuously train AI models, the filters now you have to put on in terms of the text you take into the database have to be more and more strict as to what and what isn't human-generated text. Now, you effectively cannot train a database with stuff that's statistically standard.
And that's fascinating because, for me anyway, because I always assumed that what happens with AI is you train it and it gets cleverer and cleverer and cleverer and cleverer, and then it takes over the world.
It gets thicker because these aren't AIs. They have no internal narrative. I actually think if we sort of step back a bit, the word AI is unhelpful.
Right.
These aren't artificial intelligence. These are narrative engines. They take a model and extrapolate from what you've asked it to do based on a statistical block. They are often quoted as a stochastic parrot. Yeah. But realistically, they are a narrative engine. They're very useful at certain things. But other things, they're really not very useful because they can't handle outside of statistical norms. And if you keep training them on AI data, they get stupid. Now, this that means you're going to constantly need a source of human-generated text that you can guarantee. It becomes quite valuable. Now, Microsoft and Google have basically got large pools of emails that they can look at. And Facebook, as they're working through, have got all the Facebook, etc., like that. And they've got WhatsApp and Instagram. Now, all of those platforms have a massive problem at the moment. There's huge amounts of bots and automation on them anyway, but they're better than nothing. And this leads on to the second point, which is why it's so interesting about the current farrago around Reddit.
Right.
Reddit has is broadly the same as Usenet used to be for us old folks. It's a message board, essentially.
Yeah.
A hierarchical message board where you post stuff up in. And what differentiates it from, say, stuff in Usenet was other users can vote your articles up and down. It's a good article, that's a bad article. And the topics range from the profound to the profane. But they are, in general, still mostly human generated. There's still a lot of bots in there as well. But in general, you're looking at several dozen million new items a day are generated, and probably several gigabytes of human-generated text included in that. Now, what they've done is Reddit have just increased the price of the APIs for third-party apps to do this.
Because what's happened, and I'm not trying to blame Elon Musk, but Elon Musk was one of the first people to come out and say, you're going to start paying for social media. And everyone's gone around and said, that's a good idea. We're going to start charging.
Well, it's not that, because Elon Musk bought Twitter, again, because it's a source of human-generated data. You need that to keep truing these things up. Reddit have put the price up, not to stop these third-party apps getting in. I don't think they really care. Is to establish a pricing model for access to their API for AI engines.
Right.
So all of these people on the moderators going, oh, I use these tools, etc. And these people have kind of turned it into an unpaid cottage industry. They're all up in arms, and there's been this farrago as some of the what they call subreddits.
Because in that article about Reddit, there's a person that basically donates some API, Apollo.
Yeah, Apollo app, yeah.
Which is basically written by a person.
Yeah, it is. And they've made that
on his spare time, and Reddit is basically asking for, I can't remember how much per person for using it. And he said, well, I have no money.
Yeah,
I'm closing the app.
Yeah, and the app goes at the end of this month, which is quite interesting because whilst that's a side effect, the primary thing is they want to price access at a level point so that they can sell access to OpenAI, to Google, to Facebook and Meta ones, etc. like this. Because this is so important about this human-generated text. Now, you'll notice if you look through some of Spotify's API changes, there is similar stuff in there. Well, Spotify has a vast amount of self-published music on there, which is of varying quality. Yeah. But that's basically pushed through to, and again, it's a huge source. And if you notice the stuff that was happening with Adobe Firefly, the complaints of all the stock photo generators, etc., that have been used inside of this, there is an ongoing battle now for human creation. Now, we spoke a while ago that a lot of people were worried that AIs were going to take their jobs in the creative world. Oh, I'm a content author. I'm an artist. I'm a musician.
And there are some people that have actually said, I'm a content writer and I've just lost my job and my boss has told me I've lost it to AI.
And they're going to come back because it's going to be so important that human-generated text is there because it doesn't fit human norms. I came up with a concept in the pub a while ago of that the most, particularly about text, is something I call the full stack poet. The idea being is that if you need statistically interesting text, its most contained form is poetry. Now, poetry for a long time has been almost disregarded. People don't think it's some overly intellectual or niche activity. But poetry is going to have vastly more value in a post-AI world because everybody's going to need that extremely human writing, which AI simply can't do. Now, if you look at any AI and get it to try and write poetry for you, the result is dreadful. I mean, we're talking 4-year-old. It's vastly worse than comparable text if you were getting it to write a technical journal or something like that. It simply can't write poetry well. It writes doggerel.
Right.
It doesn't write particularly good doggerel. So you could envision a future where those content authors, etc., have to sort of add some skills to their resume, but their ability to create statistically interesting text is going to be massively amplified. And that's the same as people who take photographs or people who paint or craft with their hands or people who make music. that statistically honest stuff is going to be more important. Now, in the case of the musician, the most important stuff will actually be acoustic play, because it has an inherent tempo, drift, and change that will produce authenticity. And this will be the mark of how these models evolve, is all of the big ones will have a source at scale for human-generated art, basically. Right. And that's going to be fascinating. And therefore, battles like you see in Reddit, which has been very cleverly managed as if it's a battle about access and moderator rights, when it's nothing to do with those, will be replicated across it. And I would imagine that most of our platforms that we look at will start seeing these changes in the terms and conditions that basically go is, I will allow access to your words for XYZ answers.
Just so you know, Adam plays the acoustic guitar.
So yes, Adam, you're exactly right. It is going to be good for you, because that human performance.
You are the future, Adam.
Yeah, which is not the same each time, but you might have to record repeatedly. But there will be almost like a job in the future, which was called previously content author or a sort of session musician. That's calling effectively, you are chatting up, you're creating new text or sort of AI trainer, which will become that job, which you just to play music or to write or to draw.
That sounds like the job for Adam.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a job to me as well. But that's going to be an interesting one. So that kind of slides on, because I alluded briefly into the people who create art by hand.
Yeah.
And this slides on to the other topic, which is really very interesting. It's about 3D printing. Now, 3D printing was the big flash in the pan. A lot of people, it was the previous AI. Everyone thought it was going to change the world, and nothing happened. Some industry.
I asked Father Christmas for a 3D printer, and he ignored me.
They ignored me. Yes, I don't have one either, because
yeah. Maybe you did exactly the same, but yeah.
Unfortunately, I am Father Christmas in this one. And yes, Adam, just to your point, is it humanizing just till AI reaches its own event horizon? If these were true AIs, then you would have a point. But I think these are, as I said, they're not really intelligences. They're narrative engines. And I think, therefore, they haven't yet got the ability to progress to a singularity. We'd need a different, effectively, paradigm to create those. But the thing with 3D printing is, one of the primary barriers is they're very, very difficult to use. Sounds easy, but you can do these amazing things. But the amount of trial and error and skill and frustration to try and get even a moderately expensive one, never mind the dirt cheap ones, a moderately expensive one to do something good is really, really difficult. If you look at any of these sort of video tutorials or subreddits, etc., about 3D printing, 95% of the posts is, it failed 60 hours in, they just completely failed. So this guy at Cambridge has been thinking about it for a while. I believe he's at Cambridge. And he's just got his doctorate in effectively creating self-learning software for 3D printers. By basically, you attach cameras to them and you put the sensors on and the temperature and the stuff like that.
And all the details are in on my the links to all this. It goes to all the Reddit, just for people watching, the Reddit groups and that and all of his research and his discussions are down in the chat.
And it's genuinely fascinating. So he basically didn't say to these things, I want to improve the quality of your print. It said, make good print. And it starts learning, and the print's not very good, and it's when you do it again. And very, very rapidly, they optimize the print. Now, the first thing that happens is this software kit, which is open source, you can download it and set these things up yourself, cuts down the sort of learning cycle from several months of learning cycle very, very rapidly down to hours. The things start producing good stuff pretty rapidly. The second thing is, one of the things that stops 3D printing is the amount of time. Sure, I get this great widget, but it takes 60 to 80 hours to print it. This thing immediately takes 20% off the top of that, because it optimizes the print model. Now, a lot of people, when they go, oh, I've done the print, then they do the external shell of this object they want. But the internal structures are where most of the print work is happening. People get lazy and go, click, fill in from your generator just a standard lattice. It's not linked to stress points. It's not linked to efficient curves. It basically just means that the print has to do more work. This software optimizes that instantaneously. So instead of it printing out like a very detailed grid lattice for each of these things, print something almost looks organic, that's tied in with stress points, that's tied in with effectively the efficient movement of the printer head. So your print goes down from 60 hours to, say, 45 hours immediately. But the third thing is the print quality goes up. It's not now that you've stopped enough failed attempts and it now prints faster, the print quality goes up because it puts effort into where it thinks there is stress, where it thinks it's so effectively these become not just more reliable, quicker printing, they are better objects. Now, this means that instead of you having a little cottage industry, which tends to talk about use it for prototyping or play or for something that's only got one or two uses, this now very rapidly turns it into mainstream. One of the barriers for the adoption of additive printing or 3D printing, particularly of metal, is that process is extremely difficult to do with things like metal, carbon fiber, certain ceramics, where 3D printing would be really powerful. Imagine if you could 3D print aluminium on a basis. At the moment, there is a massive skills crash, as in you can't get people to know how to optimize these things. Creating the mathematical models for efficiency is very, very difficult. And at the moment, 3D printing is, because of these effects, only a little bit better maybe than standard CNC manufacture. These software that this guy's released basically alters the balance radically. 3D printing of now nearly everything becomes much better than traditional methods of doing it. You've got a higher tolerance, stronger output that's made more efficiently, and that's starting to make some pretty fundamental assumptions about where you get very high quality products. Now, previously, you get high quality machine stuff. They're done in small and medium enterprises, which is great. They're done by specialists. They're really quite expensive. It's a strong component. It's a very strong part of the British economy, for example. Is this a strong part of the German economy as well? It hasn't been stuff that's been pushed offshore because it produces something that's unique. What's been pushed off to, say, globalized markets has been stuff that's pretty generic. I'd like 1 million of these widgets, not one. Now we've got this movement that 3D printing effectively now gets another second wind. That balance will further shift. More of these things will now be affordable to make locally, close to the sales market, because your print's quicker, the objects become a lot easier to print and effectively cheaper because they've got less material in them, and you're more reliable doing it. So these little small and medium enterprises are now going to have the ability to create much more. Now, previously they've been making metal or ceramic, finished traditionally in lathes and cutting engines. The cutting process on these things, or finishing process, is also cut down. So there's this promises to be an almost kick up the bum for the fourth industrial revolution. And you're going to start seeing manufacturing increasingly slide back from globalized markets into local markets because 3D printing is now very powerful.
And I think we're starting to see that anyway, aren't we? Because of the certain poly crisis that we've had.
Well, the poly and also things that I think supply chain resiliency is starting to look a lot important.
Yeah.
We've got this very long supply chains where you've got to have effective stability quite many months out. This ability to effectively manufacture quickly, locally, and specifically is going to alter that balance. But you're going to start seeing more almost personalized things.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's going to be coming about is 3D printing on glass. Glass is an ideal subject to 3D printer. At the moment, say if you're a high-value perfume manufacturer, you have to order your glass bottles and you want them exactly designed. They're really rather expensive. They take a long lead time. That's why you only see changes every year or so. Or you go for these different models where everything's packaged the same. You're now going to see, and it's happening very rapidly in certain of the areas like makeup and perfume, that these almost personalized packaging is going to happen, because now you can make that very close to where you want it. You don't have to necessarily ship these packages around the place. You can actually create in local markets, which means you've actually got an environmental good come out of it. Your packaging is more efficient. It's cheaper to make. You're making it where you need it. And you've now got increased supply chain resiliency. So it's going to be a really fascinating area that self-learning ability and really manifesting in 3D printers is going to start spreading elsewhere. Now that, back to Adam's point, is a much more interesting form of AI rather than generative AI. And that, I think, is something we could probably have several more conversations about in the future.
So in a way, what sort of things do you think that would be there to 3D print? So we could end up having our local 3D printer shop, a bit like we used to have an internet.
Yeah, an internet. Well, it's one of the things that everybody thought was going to happen, and it didn't because of these barriers. But you can now, instead of like sort of print shops used to be, go down Hobbs Reprographics or whatever it used to be before they all went public.
Yeah.
Hobbs is actually still going. They may have 3D printers for it, but the idea being is, instead of it being this, I need a specialist tool and I've got a separate piece of software and I've got to try that, and I can't afford to send this to Hobbs because it might break 20% of the time and they're going to charge me every time. Actually now is I can do the design here, knowing full well that when I send it to Hobbs or whoever it is, I'm not advertising Hobbs, by the way, it's just that stuck to my mind. Whenever you send it to your local 3D print shop, you know it's going to be printed. And that means you've suddenly got a very much more reliable source. It now becomes as reliable as printing out a piece of paper or getting a poster made or stuff like that.
Fascinating.
Yeah, huge area of interest.
Ed, it's been as always for me. I just sit back and absorb this stuff like a sponge.
Fantastic. Glad you like.
And I hope other people are going, and listening to this and there's so much hype out there about the AI is going to kill us, or it's a flash in the pan. I was at a conference yesterday where someone asked a question about AI, and the panel basically said, do you remember the blockchain? Yeah, well, we don't do that anymore, and AI is going to be the same.
I think one of the things that an awful lot of people are thinking is the change is going to be huge by this. It's not going to kill us, but it's going to be, say, if you looked at a standard stack of job descriptions, ranging from the juniors to the seniors, 70% of those are going to have some form of impact to it. Now, some of them, as we said, like content authoring or better testing, for example, huge impact. But others aren't. Anything with human required stuff or that deeper creativity, this is only more power to your elbow. So I think in general it's going to be positive, but I also don't see it like a blockchain. Blockchain was a beautiful solution looking for a problem.
Yes.
And didn't really have a problem. This is a solution which there are thousands of problems it helps with. So I don't see this as a flash in the pan. I don't see this guy's going, oh, we ain't going to be using it. But conversely, this is not going to kill us. Stochastic parrots are simply not threatening to humanity. They are the same as the scanner, the photocopier, the word processor, the personal computer. These are just a better paintbrush.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Ed, thank you so much. And I hope people that have been watching and listening have learned something as well. I certainly have. And we'll be back again in 2 weeks' time.
I think we're back next week, actually, aren't we?
Actually, I think we are, yes.
Back next week. Yeah. All right, take care. Thank you.
Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Bye.